Hello, friends. Welcome to the Nexus podcast. I'm your host, James Dice. Each week, I fire questions at the leaders of the smart buildings industry to try to figure out where we're headed and how we can get there faster without all the marketing fluff. I'm pushing my learning to the limit, and I'm so glad to have you here following along. This episode is a conversation with Bruce Duyshart, founder and director of Meld Strategies, a smart building consultancy based in Sydney, Australia. In this discussion, we unpack the role of a smart building consultant and the process of running and managing a smart building project and the human side of what it takes to create a successful project. So without further ado, please enjoy the Nexus podcast with Bruce Duyshart. Hey, Bruce. Welcome to the show. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, James. My name is Bruce Duyshart, and I'm the founder and principal of Meld Strategies. We're a smart building consultancy based in Sydney, in Australia.
All right. Can we start with your background? Can you go way back for me?
Way back.
Yeah.
Way back. Well, I guess my way back point of difference is that I'm actually an architect by training. So I started out being trained as an architect. All the way back in the 80s, so I completed a Bachelor of Planning and Design, did a Bachelor of Architecture in there, it was a long haul. It was architecture is a very sort of intense degree, and you spend a lot of time in the one building, whatever. So a lot of camaraderie goes out of that, and you basically out of that you learn about problem solving. It's probably the biggest sort of take out from all of that. And when I graduated, there was this massive recession in the industry. So pretty much every single one of us did not have a job. But being me, I was one of the nerds during university that actually got into computer design in the very early days. So I think one of the very earliest IBM PCs, some of the earliest versions of AutoCAD that you could possibly imagine. And after having been chastised for having used, the audacity to have used a computer during my architectural degree and not doing anything with, lines and overlapping lines and so forth, found ourselves in a position where we were setting up a summer school to teach architects who were out of work how to use this new technology thing in computer-aided design. And one thing led to another, and the professor at the university loved what we were doing. He said, keep going. And it was meant to be just a 2-week thing, and people just kept on enrolling, and we had to start from scratch. Even setting this thing up, we had to build a network, we had to write courseware, we had to do all these training materials, we had to teach and lecture, which we'd never done before. And one thing led to another, and 2 weeks turned into 2 months, which eventually turned into a job offer, and suddenly we were employed, and we had a stable job with income at the worst possible time, and learning about new technology and the birth of the internet, literally, and learning all these different things about every type of, things like, FTP and Gopher and really early internet sort of weird stuff before even the World Wide Web came about. So it was a great introduction, force-fed regarding technology and so forth. So I was then lecturing at Melbourne University in computer design, so I established the first teaching course there in computer design for people. I completed my master's in digital documents there, so I got deep into understanding what's the purpose of a document, what are the digital equivalents of it, how does it all work. So then sort of figured out all the nuts and bolts of all of that. And then I worked in various different sort of architectural practices as well, doing that sort of stuff. My father's an architect as well. And then I got picked up by Lend-Lease to come and work on a project there. And so doing this technology things and helping them do remote working and using video conferencing to communicate to remote sites and things like that. And of course, the project then went into a whole. So the project's on hold, and another kind of mini recession was beginning to happen. I was like, great, this keeps on happening to me. And they then said, look, come up to Sydney though. I was based down in Melbourne at the time, so come up to Sydney. And because we believe the skills that you have are just too important to the organisation to let go. So come up there. So had to re-establish all sorts of different things. So, I ended up at Lend-Lease for like 16 years. So through various different roles, doing project management and technology, working in the design group there. I headed up an e-business group. IT project directors of various different projects. Did all the technology for our new head office, which was the first 5-star Green Star building in Australia. So got into all the physical operational technology and IT components of that, fit out technologies and so forth. They then gave me the unenviable task of establishing and setting up the project management office, which then turned into a global role. So next minute I'm having to manage guys and work with other guys in different regions in Australia, UK, US to establish, doing project management properly across all these IT projects, and I was completely up to here with all of that. And that went on for 16 years. And so I did, major projects like the technology master plan for Barangaroo, which is a $6 billion waterfront project in Sydney that was, very large and complex. And there was something like, I think the time I left, there was about 26 different versions of a master plan that was going on there for the whole precinct. It was pretty hectic, but I'd worked across the whole of Australia, every single asset class you could possibly imagine, residential, retail, commercial property, master plan precincts, getting fiber to the premise, technology, GPON technology for master plan communities, 3 years ahead of a national rollout of the same technology. So pretty much historically over my career, I've been at the bleeding edge of technology, and new emerging technologies have actually come in. And then 9 years ago, established Meld Strategies. And so, had a vision then to establish a consulting business around creating smart buildings at a point everyone was going, what the hell's a smart building? Which was a very, very interesting prospect, because it hadn't quite settled at that particular point. People going, oh, is it an intelligent building? Is it I don't know what it is, and then what's the definition of a smart building? And then you'd read these definitions that go on for pages. Yeah. It's like you're falling asleep halfway through the definition and going, you just don't get the clear thing. So I wrote a book, right? So I kind of basically unpacked my brain from everything that I had learned over my career to that point. There you go. Something prepared earlier. Thank you, James. So
yeah, for those of you that are listening to just the audio, I just pulled out Bruce's book, Smarter Buildings, Better Experiences. Beautiful yellow cover.
Yeah, there you go. So that was me unpacking my brain as to how does one go about creating a smart building when not actually at that point having yet created a smart building from start to finish in its completeness. Done elements of and done ICNs and IP backbones and all the different bits, but collectively having a process by which you can actually create a smart building requires a considerable amount of thought. And so for me, the process of writing a book was an ability to actually concentrate on a topic for the first time and say, how should one actually go about doing this? And so as I began to piece it all together and go, right, this has to be done there. So knowing, all of the human engineering, discovery, planning, brainstorming, blue sky planning, all those sort of things, cost planning, etc. All the stuff that I had learned over my career how to do this, I had to put together and formulate into a plan, which basically says, here is as you like to call it in the US or in some parts, the whole thing from soup to nuts, from start to finish as to how it all comes together. So that's kind of the background of where we are. So now have established Meld Strategies, and we specialize just in creating smart buildings. So we're not an engineering firm, we're not an MSI. We basically help our clients who are property developers, and we work with design professionals, we work with builders and so forth to help them realize a vision and a strategy for creating a smart building, helping to define what actually it is, and just going through that whole process and steering everything out there. So there's a guiding hand throughout the whole process.
Got it. Yeah, the background, the reason I have this is because when I was creating our foundations course, I was kind of like you, where I was like, I'm still learning this in a way, but I haven't put all these pieces together. And so it was like, I put together my outline, and then I read your book, and I was like, okay, we're along the same lines. In most parts of your book, it maps pretty well to how we teach smart buildings in our foundations course. So that was fun. So I thank you for that, for helping create that.
Oh, pleasure. I mean, probably like yourself. I mean, I was in writing that book and going, well, at that point, I think there was about only 2 other books, I think, around at the time that actually I think Jim Sinopoli had one and so on. And
I used that one
they were
too.
quite technical, right?
Yeah.
So you look at this thing and going, well, written for engineers, right? So I was going, okay, well, how do we make this more accessible? Just like your podcast is, right? So you're saying, okay, how do we translate this in a way that actually enables a greater majority of people to actually understand what the hell these concepts are? So, I mean, weird stuff. Like, I'd be in meetings where people are going, all right, we're talking about IP, this, that, and the other, and next minute someone's ears prick up and they think, okay, we need to get the lawyers involved here. It's like, no, well, hang on. It's TCP IP, it's something else. It was like, and people just didn't understand the fundamentals, things like bandwidth or just basic. And then even when I started researching it, they're going, man, what's an illustration that shows you what is bandwidth, right?
Yeah.
And it's perplexing as to why some basic concepts aren't even illustrated or explained to people in layman's terms in a way that helps them to understand. So I congratulate you on your podcast and helping to sort of unpack these sorts of topics to help explain to people what's going on here.
Thanks. And I had a actually similar college experience too. So I graduated in 2010. So I don't know what financial crisis you were a part of, but mine was the global financial crisis.
Financial crisis, yeah.
That was when I graduated, and I was still able to find a job. But at that point, for me, it was similar to you. Like, you became an expert in CAD, which was a little early. I became an expert in energy modeling, and that really helped me. I learned it in college as an intern, and then took that into the workforce when a bunch of mechanical engineers knew a ton about HVAC, but they didn't know anything about how to produce an energy model. So anyway, it's funny how you use technology to kind of find jobs in hard times.
That's it. Lemonade out of lemons.
Exactly. There's part of your background though that doesn't make sense to me. So you were an architect by training. You learned CAD, but then all of a sudden you had this IT job. So how'd you learn the IT side of things?
Well, out of necessity again. So through setting up, for example, the networking side of the network for the computer training course, somehow we got involved in helping set up the network for the whole in the faculty building. So at that point, there was that side of things. I got involved in doing the programming stuff. So I trained myself in how to program in Autolisp and things like that, and designing web pages, so coding on that side. So there was a coding aspect to it, there was a networking aspect to it, and then bit by bit you begin to build up and absorb what's going on around you. And remember, because it's early days, everything's sort of new and everyone's going, all right, hey, did you know that you can just click on something here and next minute you're over in MIT and you can browse through this directory thing over there and look in all these folders and see stuff that's going on. It's like, mind blown. And of course you then dig and saying, how's that work? And how's it happen? So I think having an inquisitive mind to understand how things actually work as opposed to the theory of it is essential to being an innovator and understanding where can you go to next, and then reading where things are going and just educating yourself.
Absolutely. All right, so tell me more about Meld. So can you talk about some of the key projects you guys work on right now? Like, what types of projects, what types of buildings, what types of clients do you have?
Yes. So, look, I mean, starting off with the team, you've got to have a good team to begin with, right? So, again, you need people that actually have experience, and we have a range of people with large different sort of backgrounds and so forth. Some through sort of the architectural sort of path there as well. Project management, in a range of different areas as well. People who've worked on building control systems and electrical engineers, solar engineers, all that sort of stuff there builds up a team whereby we actually understand how these things work, right? So it's really important to have a team with capability that has the experience enough to know how to go about doing this. So the projects we get involved in are commercial office buildings, sort of starting from scratch, new builds, and that starts our process from the very beginning, sort of end to end. There's different types of refurbishment projects that come up from time to time where asset owners are looking to say, well, what else can we do? Because obviously it becomes a bit of a comparison game at times, and people are going, oh, okay, well, we've seen these new buildings have these features around what they're doing in their lobby regarding visitor management, for example, or just simply getting an IP backbone in the building, or having dashboards in the building, or improving the entry facilities. So you need smart lockers in there, things like that. So refurbishment projects bring around a lot of the attributes, more so on the occupant-facing technologies, and workplace things. So COVID has been, I guess, a massive catalyst for introducing a new range of technologies, and I found that throughout my career as well. When times get tough, actually, weirdly or fortuitously, people actually turn to technology as a potential solution. So you need to differentiate yourself from the market. You need to actually use technology to increase efficiency and performance of buildings and things, workplaces and so forth. And so, so people do focus on technology. And we definitely saw that throughout COVID, when people are going, all right, what are we going to do here to help facilitate return to work? So we've got lots of projects where we have been working with clients nationally across their portfolio, helping them understand how do we improve workplace environments and the use of technologies in that workplace, but then surprise, surprise, how does that workplace environment integrate with the base building, and work around areas such as security and so forth, so that to improve that user experience of coming into the building or working there after hours or count the number of people coming in, etc. So pretty diverse and across commercial office buildings, mixed use, retail, residential, multi-unit residential, build to rent, things like that.
Yeah. And so it seems like, looking at some of your work and the projects you've worked on, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in more detail, but I just wanted to ask you this up front. It seems like you have a similar mindset to a lot of the writing I've been doing recently around the horizontal architecture. It seems like you just said, integrating with the base building, right? So there's the base building, which is the device layer. And it seems like everything you do, or everything you've done recently, has some sort of converged network happening.
Yes.
And then and then some sort of data platform on top. I can't remember what you call it, and then some sort of application layer at the top. Is that kind of your mindset?
That's pretty much the architecture. Yes, because basically the simple principle is that the control systems at the bottom end of that layer, the operational technologies, are really your best of breed systems, right? So they're your access control, lighting control, lift control, etc.
Yeah.
Obviously, all these systems over time need to connect to an IP network, right? So that's in the States, you call it a converged network, or we call it an integrated communications network, or an ICN. Principles the same. However, the subtlety of it, and it was sort of reinforced with me when I went to the IVCon conference, recently, is that converged network terminology has come about because there's more owner-occupied assets in the States. Thereby, you've got IT and operational technologies coexisting on the one network. So you might have an entire building, for example, that's owned by Adobe, or so they own the building and they're the tenant in there. So the economy of scale is put everything on the one network, right? Which on paper looks good, right? In Australia, we freak out at that concept because really these two things should be air gap from each other, because otherwise you're basically putting yourself in front of a whole range of cybersecurity, issues on that front on there. So you've got sensitive, potentially, commercial and confident, information, or person identifiable information, blah blah blah, right? All going over the same network, right? And that's only ever going to be as good as the weakest link in the chain, right? So that can go complex very, very quickly. So we like to prefer to keep those things separately. And then that independent data layer on top, which you're talking about, which is sort of changing in shape and size and so forth there, and then a presentation layer on top of all of that, right? And with that architecture brings about a flexibility to choose the best of breed, right, of what's going around. And what I've learned over my career, as much as you'd like to think the last building is just like the next building, every building more or less is a prototype. Because you're not stamping out exactly the same building every single time, even if it's stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3 of a 3-building precinct, for example, it is likely that over the course of those projects, things will inevitably change. So things will change in changes of technology, or have happened because of procurement processes, or the design team has changed slightly, or the construction team slightly different, or other types of things. So as much as you would hope that this is just a infinitely repeatable, exactly the same process, every building ends up more or less having some unique characteristics, which requires the hand holding, which is kind of the service we provide to our customers to help them steer their way through understanding how to achieve the best possible outcome under the circumstances, with the budget they've got, looking at the risk profile they have for the project.
Got it. Before we get to the hand holding, I'd love to hear just how, so you've been doing this for 9 years. Yeah. How is that data layer, that independent data layer, how has that piece of the puzzle changed throughout those 9 years?
Let's just say it's a work in progress. I mean, it's both overwhelming and underwhelming at the same time, the progress that has been made, right? I mean, you've sort of had this under the microscope many times on your podcasts, and everyone just hones in on the BMS. I think mainly because that's the background that they've had, and that's where they come from. And here we are in 2022, and everyone's going, there is no complete set of data tags or what's the right ontology, blah, 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 to help explain what's just in that environment, let alone go down all the others to all the other stuff there as well. And as soon as you head past your traditional kind of, lift, sliding control, access, etc., the mind goes blank and the whiteboard goes up, and they're going, I don't know, what are we going to call these data points that's coming out of our car, our car park management system, for example, right? Yeah. And it was like, right, what discipline does that even fall under? And there's a lot of areas there that have yet to be fully resolved. But look, the principles are all the same, yeah. And at the end of the day, there has to be just clear communication around what your approach actually is, and it has to be well documented and understood and communicated and so forth. And I guess out of frustration, a lot of organizations are going, okay, well, look, we're going to have to start just developing our own standards around this, trying to comply as much as possible with emerging and evolving standards, but at least getting that line in the sand that's documented that says, okay, next job, here's where we last left off, and it should be sort of named like this. But consistency and documentation is key, so that the next person picking it up or the other person on that project can understand what the hell's actually going on, or has a structure or a schema that can be followed. Is really, really, really important. Yeah, totally. So let's talk about this hand-holding, as you called it, this consultant role, the smart building consultant. Yes. I think the best way to start with that topic would be your definition. So you mentioned earlier, there's, these definitions end up looking like books and fall asleep before you get to the end of them. How do you guys define what a smart building is? Smart building is, okay, right. So this is one of the things I had to do in my book as well. And even then I've done a few little sort of tweaks, to it. So we've defined a smart building as a building that's safer, healthier, more comfortable, resilient and productive building for its occupants, and more operationally efficient one for its owners through its life cycle. And the key thing there we emphasize is the life cycle aspect of it, right? It's thinking beyond the defects liability period, as one can cruelly sort of say, a lot of buildings are designed to survive the defects liability period and see you later, right? So builders aren't encumbered with the operational expense of running a building, for example. So as much as they will fulfill the requirements to make it a, LEED Gold, LEED Platinum, Green Star, whatever sort of rating type of building, understanding how to continuously improve the performance of the building in order to lower energy consumption or lower operational costs really is not a part of their KPIs of their thinking in delivering the building, right? So it's really important to understand the drivers that sit behind that and how one can actually achieve, those outcomes. Yeah. Okay.
Hey guys, just another quick note from our sponsor, Nexus Labs, and then we'll get back to the show.
This episode is brought to you by Nexus Foundations, our introductory course on the smart buildings industry. If you're new to the industry, this course is for you. If you're an industry vet but want to understand how technology is changing things, this course is also for you. The alumni are raving about the content, which they say pulls it all together, and they also loved getting to meet the other students on the weekly Zoom calls and in the private chat room. You can find out more about the course at courses.nexuslabs.online. All right, back to the interview. Okay, so now talk about the role, like the role you play to like make that happen in a big picture way.
Sure. So it starts off with the strategy side of things, and really helping the client understand what is the outcome that they're actually looking for. And most of the time they don't really understand necessarily what that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they've heard about it. Look, the analogy I give is always, it's a bit like when green buildings first came about, right? So when green buildings first came around, everyone was like, great concept, makes sense. We need to be more environmentally sustainable. Let's start making green buildings. Pause.
What does that actually mean? Yeah.
What does that mean? And then sort of the world struggling, going, okay, what is a green building? Good point. Okay, and then as you begin to unpack that, people have realized, oh, okay, it's a holistic design process. It affects everything. It affects the materiality of the building. It affects, the way you measure the building. All the sustainable sort of principles have to go, and they apply to mechanical, electrical, hydraulic, fire, lift, et cetera, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the way down ultimately to sort of workplace environments, et cetera, depending on what you're doing. And there always is that separation between core and shell and tenancy as well. Now, wind forward, that's the same with technology and smart building. So the strategy part of it really is being sort of understanding, what is the outcomes you're looking for, depending upon the stakeholders that you're trying to appeal to. I mean, is this something that's really being driven, by the facilities managers, or is it something that's being driven by leasing and tenants? Is it something that's been driven by sustainability? Is it being and the reality is it's more than likely going to be a combination of all those different stakeholders.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that, right? So the process really is to be clear on what the outcomes you're looking for. Everyone wants to understand what's in it for me. Yeah. So if I'm a tenant now, what makes it smart? Yeah. Or if I'm a facilities manager running the building, well, why is it smart? What does it do for me? Yeah. So understanding what those questions actually are, and what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and how is that going to actually work is critical to sort of steering through that strategy process to help articulate a clear vision around the outcomes to be achieved.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of it is human engagement. Can you talk about this 80-20 rule that you have?
Oh, yeah. So my 80-20 rule is pretty much that it's 20% about technology, and there are a lot of technologies in buildings. So we would see probably anywhere from 25 to 40 different sort of technologies or technology touch points in a building involved in a smart building. And it's 80% about people and human engineering, right? So what I've learned over many years is that all the way from the beginning through to the end, funny enough, there's people involved, and they all have different they all go about thinking about and using technology different ways. Some people want to be there and are proactive and assertive and go, I don't really care how it actually happens, but they've got a vision to say, I want this to happen, right? So they're kind of your early adopter sort of crowd, your early majority. Then there's got people who are sitting on the fence, right? They're your late majority, and they just sort of going, I don't know, I guess so. And then you got the guys there who just do not want to be there, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, until there's some sort of evidence, and they're the guys who are going to be prodding, and they're going to be saying, well, prove to me the ROI. Why should we be putting these things in here? Show me the evidence that says that this has been successfully done before across 5 different buildings, right? Etc. And if we adopted that same mindset, we'd probably still be going around in a horse and cart still, etc. So really being able to read the room, understand those different value propositions, understanding what represents value to the person who's actually going, well, why should we do this, right? Knowing it. So every now and again, still to this day, you'll have someone saying, so why are we using an IP network? Why do we have to do that? Now, seriously, this is 2022, and you still have sometimes people going, well, why? Right? It doesn't, because they never sat down enough to sort of think about why, and then you're going, oh my God, okay, right. Let me cast my mind back 20 years ago when I was being asked the same thing, and what was the rationale that one can use to do that? And that was something that I had to do on the Barangaroo project, for example. Yeah, when I was saying we should have an ICN in every building, right? So here's a $6 billion precinct. Right? I go, why are we doing an ICN? Says the builder. Like, right, okay. So how much should we spend? How much do we spend on cabling, for example? And I'm asking this question to 30-year veteran cost planning estimators, right? Who are going, of course we, and then pregnant pause. The reality is they didn't know the answer. They didn't know how much money was actually spent on cabling. Why? Because they know that there's an electrical package, and within an electrical package, there's a security package. Yeah, they know that there's cabling associated with it, but they don't understand the real cost associated with it, right? Because elementally, they haven't unpacked it enough, because they just look at a cost per square meter rate and they say, that's it, right? And as you and I both know, you can't estimate the cost of a building on a cost per square meter rate, because technology is elemental, right? And so taking people through that process to say, okay, well, you can actually save money using ICN. I had to go back to first principles and say, okay, how much it costs per linear meter for cabling and trays and coordination and blah, 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 blah. And then we eventually came up with a number that was just unbelievably massive, right? And the millions and millions of dollars of savings that could be made just through simply dematerialization of cabling to arrive at one common IP infrastructure, etc. But that was the evidence that a certain element of the industry required in order for them to make the next step logically. That says, okay, I accept now the fact that having a common converged IP network actually is more efficient and will save us money on this particular project. All right, tick. But unless you're prepared to, in some cases, go through that behavioural change process and provide the evidence, you sometimes are going to get a lot of no's on things. But it's kind of, the experience is knowing what direction people are actually sort of pushing in or likely to behave, and knowing when is the timely information they will need in order to help them make decisions around different things. All right, okay, because they're hearing feedback, for example, from leasing agents that says, yes, that would be a useful thing to have in the building. We're hearing some positive feedback about the importance of these sorts of things in their trip facilities, and so forth. And the other aspect of it really is understanding how buildings actually operate and work, and so forth. And having that, that human experience about operation and how that works could then lead into the business process, and then the technology, importantly, that drives all of that and actually can support that outcome on there. So we don't like doing technology for technology's sake. So it has to be driven by a business need for doing it. And that 80-20 rule, you need to be prepared to do the hard yards, and that's where the experience comes in, because you've been there before, you've seen it before, you've seen the pushback, you know what goes wrong in the field, you know it actually works enough to help guide and facilitate people based upon the experience to make things happen. Yeah. Totally. And the bigger picture of all of that is that if that process is not facilitated, things tend to fall down, right? And the process of concept design or detailed design or construction or operation, the handover, can fall over. And if one part of that falls over along the way, then guess what? Technology falls under the bus. Yeah. And then, the headline reads, oh, this whole thing is stupid. Technology hasn't worked. Which bit? Oh, all of it. Oh, okay. So, and then you try and unpack actually what the hell they're talking about and which part of it, right? So, weakest link in the chain, particularly when this is all new and the experience isn't there and everyone is on a learning curve, is hard, right? So you need to learn to expect the issues to come about and how to deal with that type of thing behaviorally. Yep. Totally.
This is all very validating to me, because our course that we developed with the help of your book, but with a lot of other input as well. But it's very validating, because if there's been one criticism of it from students, it's that you didn't quite get into AI, or you didn't quite get into digital twins enough at I wanted to go deeper into technology, but what we've created it around is like every week is kind of like 80/20. Every week, like it's basically engaging stakeholders, developing out use cases, which means engaging with people that are actually out there doing things in buildings, engaging with integrators and understanding what needs to happen in existing systems to enable new technologies, engaging with the supply chain and the vendors out there to understand what technologies are capable of, right?
Yes.
Engaging with financial stakeholders to understand how this use case makes an impact in someone's business, right? And then finally, we do week 6, which is all about careers and all about like all the companies that are in our industry. Like if you're going to get a job in smart buildings, like what are the types of companies, what are the types of roles? So if you think about that, what I just said, like that's all people.
It is 100%,
all people.
100%, and it is not to be underestimated. And just sort of picking up your point there that you made about digital twins and AI, right? I mean, that's sort of out there at the edge, which is sort of, 6-dan black belt stuff, right?
Right.
I mean, some people might go, oh, well, look, that's really easy. You should be doing that. And why don't you do it? But look, unless you have the fundamentals right, unless you have the foundations right, unless you've actually got people confident on the basics of it there, why the hell are you trying? I mean, you know how hard it is just trying to pull data out of a building, let alone pull data of a building and connect it to a high resolution, 500 LOD BIM model thing that you're expecting somehow this next generation black belt facilities manager is going to run and operate and lead and go, yeah, I'm totally good with that. I was expecting that. Why wasn't it here yesterday? Type of thing, right? It's just not a reality in our industry. Now, it is appropriate to some industries and some sectors, and some asset owners might be prepared to go there because they're prepared to invest the time and the skills and the resourcing and are prepared to cop that on the chin. But when you're looking at the a baseline capability, you got to get some runs on the board first of all before you can actually begin to progress that particular level. And for example, in our work, we would much rather you use less technology and implement it well than attempt something which is so far out there and has a significantly higher potential to go wrong. Thus throwing everything under the bus, thus the potential for someone to be saying, aha, I told you so. Why have we spent all this money trying to implement something that couldn't be implemented with the skill set we've got, right? Because it's even a bit of a leap of faith, assuming somehow that the builder is going to be capable, in the sort of environment we all sort of face globally, to be able to pull this off, right? So it requires a lot of dedication just in the best of times, let alone assuming the market will kind of figure this out, So says the hopeful specification. There's people just lying around going, oh, great, another AI driven building has just turned up, right? So awesome. It requires a lot of persistence.
And just to be clear, like obviously I love all of the cutting edge technologies. I'm sure you do too. I could just go 100%. Deep into it all day, but it's important to then point out that you have prerequisites to getting to that cutting edge that you must 100%. Walk through. Yeah.
I mean, think of it like a building, right? You can't just build 50 stories on sand, right? You got to have foundations. You got to have the fundamentals there in the first place. You got to have, the cyber secure, rigorous, ICN there from a network communications perspective. You need the high speed, symmetrical internet services connecting to that building. You need the data layer properly organized, properly tagged, properly structured. You need a presentation layer that's going to be intuitive and easy to understand with multiple stakeholders. You need, these sorts of things as foundations as your starting point, right? Before you then go, well, what's the next level up that, next level up that? And you can always come back and improve things, after the fact if you get those foundations right. But if you haven't got them right, then you've just got this veneer of an approach. I mean, part of this is I call it management by airline magazine, right? It's where people come in with this, great idea. It's like, oh, I've just read that so-and-so is doing a digital twin. We need to be doing a digital twin. It's like, we haven't even done our first smart building. We haven't done our, anything yet. We don't even, baby steps, haven't done anything at all. But I want to do, something out there which is just a plaque on the wall or some sort of amazing thing, but haven't yet sort of gone down the road of understanding how does this all work and what does it take to achieve.
Totally.
So,
all right, let's go through what it takes to achieve. Let's go through the different phases of a project with you guys. So I want to walk through each of them, and I have multiple questions about each of them for you. So let's go back to the strategy phase you talked about. What does the strategy phase entail?
Okay, the strategy stage there, we start out with sort of education and communication around what sort of things you can actually do. So, kind of run a workshop, get a shared vision happening, understand what the end outcome is going to look like, right? So, and at that point, you need to understand really what are the types of technologies that can actually be used. What does it mean? And help them with the cost planning process, really. So to understand how much is this actually going to cost preemptively. Most cost planners, estimators are not good at this. So we actually go through the whole process to help unpack that and understand what that is. And we're pretty accurate in our estimates, over time of what that actually looks like.
And real quick, on the cost estimates, are you doing costs compared to status quo of the vision that they have? How does that work?
Which again is a bit of a moving target as well. So what is status quo, right? Are you comparing it to a building that is similar in nature that has done, for example, mobile access control, or is it standard access control, right? Yeah. So there's always got a component which is going to be a delta to what is business as usual, or is it a brand new technology that they haven't considered before? So, for example, in this building, you've got people counters or IAQ sensors, never been done before, not a part of the thing. Well, that's a part of a technology uplift cost, right? Okay. So basically, you're looking at deltas in some way, at least some ability to articulate a cost associated with it, and kind of you're scrutinizing back with the cost planner going, well, is that included in your post time? Is that included in your price? And most of the time they're going, I think so. I'm not quite sure. It's usually the response you get back. So it's a little bit underwhelming, but at least they're increasingly getting aware of the topic areas. Yeah. But that's where kind of our, the experience that you need to understand, how things actually get priced by, contractors and so forth come into play. Okay. So at that particular point, and we help articulate that through a range of different ways, and showing, visually, with a master plan, or with a kind of reverse brief as well, which basically encapsulate all that sort of thinking and being able to communicate to stakeholders, this is what we plan to do, essentially. So another way of articulating the strategy part of it is sort of describing it as a concept design stage. So that concept design stage, you really want to have everybody on the same page and saying, yep, we know the outcome we're looking for here, things that help to improve safety, security, sustainability, placemaking, well-being, etc. Yep. And everybody is on the same page in terms of the investment and effort that will be required to do that. Yep. That's your first stage around strategy. The next stage is design, and typically we would take carriage of all the specialist technology areas on there as well, and we will look after things around the specifications for things such as the independent data layer. And this is another terminology that actually is confusing the whole industry, so we need to land on this, James. Let's do it. So independent data layer, ISP, OIP, do-re-mi, I don't know, it comes up with these different terminologies that people haven't quite stuck, but I think the description of an independent data layer is probably the best conceptual description of that as well. But and there's multiple ways you can go around it, and increasing by the day the methodologies and approaches that you can take to the architecture of that type of platform as well. But dashboards, so all the specialist technologies we'll take carriage of, and then also we need to provide some level of input to the services engineers, designers as well, who may or may not, depending on their skill set, understand what's required if the outcome is a smart building. So that's detailed design, essentially, getting it to a point when it goes out to market, that the market will understand and be able to easily interpret what is required from a technology perspective, in the same way that they're also understanding from a sustainability perspective, because there will be an ESD consultant, for example, that is involved in defining what's required for them to achieve, LEED or Green Star or GRESB or whatever it is. Okay, so you've got a technology component, you've got a sustainability component, you've got your normal service component, and then hopefully the builder is in a position where they can actually understand what is required, what are the contractors they will need, what are the proposed technologies that are on the tech stack, etc. And ideally, how those different systems and approaches will be packaged across different contractors for it to work. So at that point, the project will have been tendered.
Can I ask you a real quick follow-up?
Yeah.
So you and I were having dinner at Realcomm. We were stuffing our faces with tapas, and our mutual friend Tyson, he said, so Tyson Suter, he said, Bruce writes the best specifications. Can you? And I wrote that down. Can you? Can you give me some, how do you write the best specifications, and what are the best specifications?
Well, the best specification is actually understanding how the thing gets built.
Okay.
Yeah. At the end of the day, right? I mean, you have to put yourself in the contractor's shoes and go, well, what is it they need to know? And you look at a lot of specifications, and there's just what is that? I mean, you don't need to tell them about the standards and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's perhaps not helpful. So I guess it's really helping contractors to price the job fairly, and going back to this human engineering aspect of it, right? So when people don't understand, there's a saying, where there's mystery, there's margin, right? And people will price accordingly. If a builder or a contractor is looking at something they don't understand, it's how does that work? I better raise my price to cover that, because if it doesn't end up the way that I think it's going to come out, right, then I'm going to get in trouble here, right? Yeah. So there has to be clarity around what's actually required, and being articulated in a way that's just easy to interpret.
Got it. Can you give me an example of something, if you were writing a spec for the independent data layer, for instance, what would be something that would have to be in that to make that buildable,
of course,
priceable?
Of course, you've focused in on the trickiest one of all.
I had to,
simply because there are emerging a range of different architectures around this, and this is, I think, where it is actually getting quite tricky in the industry, because what we're doing here is writing a specification for the MSIs. Okay, what is it you need to do? Now, MSIs, it's going to come down to, how independent are they actually in terms of the solutions they're going to choose? Now, the definition of an integrator is someone who's able to integrate a whole range of different, in their opinion, best practice technology systems together to help produce an outcome. So in the network engineering world, an integrator will go, well, we're going to use this type of firewall, which might be different from all the Cisco switches, for example, right? And the reason why we use that particular firewall, because its manageability, its price point, its security levels is equivalent to something else. So rather than just buying one brand for everything, you're going, look, we know that it's compatible because of these protocols, and that we can actually integrate, use that there. It's easy to integrate, it saves time, et cetera, et cetera. Now, an integrator should be doing the same sort of thing. Now, but if that MSI turns out to be an agent for only one product, and the architecture of that particular product says that it has to go this particular way, then your ability to, when we sort of, we're like Switzerland, right? We have to be like Switzerland.
Yeah.
And say, okay, well, look, we got to play this with it's not going to be leading down the path that it must be this particular technology, or it must be, this particular technology solution. And so, the skill around this is coming up with, supporting the principles of open standards, open systems, manageability, understanding, OpEx costs, and all those types of areas on there as well. So it has to be written in a way that it's outcome focused, standards based in its approach, and with enough flexibility there to allow the MSI to do what they know best, in terms of the way you actually procure and implement the particular system, and also ultimately is acting in the best interests of the asset owner at the end of the day, trying to escape from the kind of technology for technology's sake. Is there really a reason to capture this much data for the sake of capturing, that much data, right? Does it really make economic sense to go through the pain of trying to capture the 90 points that are available to you in a smart meter, right? When really we only need 6.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So putting a measure on it in a way that, because technology can be solved in many ways. There's more than one way to skin a cat, right? So what's the most prudent economic way of going about doing is I think key, to writing these specifications in a way that helps everybody win, right? So you're doing the right thing by the owner, you're doing the right thing by the contractor, you're doing the right thing by the builder, and you're not just punishing people for the sake of punishing people because you've got no idea, and for the avoidance of data, I would just do everything, right? So ultimately that doesn't go well.
Okay, I interrupted you before the implementation phase.
So I think, at that point there, it's just really at the end of that procurement process, talking with the builders, making sure that they understand what's involved, talking with, they'll usually have a services engineer or someone like that will be responsible for implementing systems. Do they really properly understand what's involved in here? Do they have the skill set? Do they need a hand? More often than not, they will need a hand in being able to, steer through the process and understand what their contractors are doing, because, tenders are a very time pressure thing, right? Back to this human condition. It's like, has a builder seen this sort of type of specification for the first time and they're kind of quietly on the inside freaking out?
Yeah.
Are they admitting that they're freaking out, or they're just going, oh, we've got this, we're all good, and then finding out later they're not good and they don't know really what they're doing, and then you find out. So there's a stage which is a very interesting transition from the point, going through tender, and then, contractor X has got the job, and then all right, then the conversations come out and going, yeah, we're gonna need a hand with this one. But we assure people it's fine, right? I mean, this is the journey that everyone's going on, right? Yeah. I think the mistake here is to say I know it all, right? I know everything, right? Because it can be a recipe for disaster. So, and that's really what the implementation process is all about, right? It's getting away from the ... Well, I assumed, right? Never assume the assumptions that you think are in people's heads, right? So the process here is to really go through and make sure that the builder is organized, structured, is procuring at the right time, has got the right contractors on board, the contractors getting the right products, they're presenting the right samples, the right level of testing's happening, allowing for Murphy's Law, and, the things can and will go wrong, and allowing, I think a lot of people suffer from what I call optimism bias. Yeah. How hard could it be? Well, actually hard, right? But it's more to do with coordination, right? So, one trade might get it, but the others simply do not. And they don't really understand the implications of what they're doing. Take smart bathrooms, for example. There's a knock-on effect. It just looks a simple hydraulic thing, but actually now you've got network cabling involved. You've got, mechanical, or trying to report in either BACnet or some other sort of, communications protocol. It's got to go to some other network. Suddenly the plumber's going, whoa, I'm in another world here all of a sudden. I never thought this. Back in plumbing school, I never thought this would happen, right? So, so how does that work, right? So you have to sort of help steer that process, through, and that's what our guys actually are really good at, is helping builders, and then ultimately reporting back to the owners that this is actually what's going on. This is actually how it's working, and so forth. So implementations is a pretty sort of interesting process, leading all the way up to practical completion, where everybody wants everything sort of working on the day, at handover. So the first part of it, and then just hand-holding that process to hand over to facility managers and making sure they understand to operate this building, which now has these 40 technologies in it compared to the 6 that they used to have. Rolls off the tongue, right? But,
sure does.
Human engineering, right?
So I think one of the things people struggle with all that process you just took everyone through is the different roles of the people that aren't core contractors, right? So there's like the consultant role that you guys are playing. There's the design engineer's role. There's the MSI role. There's the commissioning agent role. All of those are kind of like, in a way, they're all kind of like service provider, consultant type of professionals, right? So how do you delineate between all of those on the projects that you work on?
Well, that's a very important thing to do, and that's what we establish up front at the beginning of the whole project. And usually that's a question that's in the mind of the client anyway. Yeah. Who are all these people? What do they all do, right? So the education process starts right there. So they need to be educated as to, look, here's what we do, here's what they do. In some cases, we are the lead on a certain topic, and then we will provide input to someone else's design, right? Okay. In other cases, they're the lead, like the MEP consultant, right? They're the lead, but we will provide some input to the design that they're coming up with. Yeah. And I think as long as those demarcation lines are actually clear up front, in the same way as it's clear what an ESD consultant is actually doing, for example, and how they're interacting, what access they were required. And when that's all clear up front and through the course of a project, then you don't have either double ups or complete misses where no one's got it, right? And so if everyone's on the same page as to their roles and responsibilities over the course of a project, then the outcome is much better.
Got it. And then, so specifically on the MSI piece, how do you sort of think about on a normal project when there's an MSI? Like, what do you guys do and what do they do? Can you describe that process?
Well, it's a scale thing. And I think the biggest thing that we bring to the table, obviously, writing the specification for it in the first place and going back to those things we were talking about previously, because obviously they have their own methodology about how they go and doing things, but it's just applying the rigor and the helping out with the coordination that's actually required, to make their job more efficient and time and cost effective in what they're doing. So that we're helping to get the ducks all lined up in a way that actually they're getting timely information in a way they're not going, well, where is this guy that's meant to be the contractor so and so doing something, then those things are being coordinated in a way that that there's stuff being procured in the right manner. Because look, their focus really is on this independent data layer, right? And in some cases the presentation layer of how that all comes together, right? So the more they can focus that and less on the where's the system, where's the contractor, who do I talk to, how's that all work, etc., then they can really focus on the core deliverable, which is around the technology and so forth, then that makes everything sort of flow together. Because we're managing the client up one end, the next incoming facilities manager, it might be a tenant, rep manager or leasing agents. There's a whole lot of people that need to understand everything that's going on or about to happen on this particular project, and everything's all been quartered away. Then we can provide greater clarity around what the deliverables actually will look like, because we're gathering requirements a little bit along the way in that process as well, and helping to feed the MSI with timely information so they can do the best possible job.
Got it. Yeah. So they can basically just implement.
Correct.
Got it. Cool. So let's tie all this together. I'd love to hear about one project in particular that comes to mind, like a case study. Can you tell us a story around like a specific building on this specifically? I'm curious about the 80-20 thing. Like, who are the key humans that had to be brought along? Okay. And how did you sort of make it happen?
Sure. I mean, I know that just before we started here, we said, okay, well, let's pull out one building, right? But it's a bit like sort of saying which one's your favorite, which one's your favorite child, right? Yeah. Or it's a bit like saying which is the smartest building in the world, right? It's like, well, there's elements of different buildings, where which was good and bad. So I mean, I'll talk across some of sort of the issues that we see, which is probably of more interest to your listeners on that perspective. So, in this process where, education of stakeholders is really key. So, and I think really sort of, getting things coordinated and aligned and so forth in the documentation process is really sort of, critical in delivery. But in construction, things happen that require a lot of attention to achieve a successful project. So even projects with all these different things going on, and things are being signed off, etc. You walk in the comms room and it's like, hang on, we've got a whole BIM model that's building, and I'm seeing trade waste pipes going through the comms room. How does this happen, right? So I won't name the building, but this is an award-winning building, and this is what confronts us when you go and visit site and then look in that room and saying, what is going on here? How did this happen? And the builder goes, oh yeah, contractor must have just done that. All right, okay, yeah, we'll just get them to move it, right? But just so much stuff sort of happens that's unexpected. So there's that delivery process there across the board that can occur, and it's the diligence applied to the way it gets delivered. So at the end of the day, these things do actually come together, but requires an enormous amount of work and facilitation to do it. And we've got a number of buildings that have won multiple awards, like GPO Exchange in Adelaide. We did with Charter Hall, and even sort of going through the process of writing the award submission, you do begin to realise the enormity of the effort that was required all the way from the very beginning to, have a client that is able to set a vision properly, that sort of says, well, help them to create that vision. It's probably more the case. So they understand, look, they have an aspiration, we want to do this, articulating, what are the benefits, and actually being able to articulate those benefits back, really, really clearly is important to making sure that you've got a team that actually works. So, I think the successful projects are the ones where there is a great rapport, throughout the delivery process, and understanding and working with the builder, because you're there to help. I think a perception from a lot of builders is you're there as a pain in the ass to sort of, you're coming up with all this stuff that they don't normally do. It's like, why are we doing all this technology stuff? You're just describing pain to me, right? And I'm having to get water meters of a type that we've never used before. I'm having to get my contractor to do things in terms of pulling data out we never had to worry about before. So we were just talking about this the other day in our work in progress meeting there, about the process when creating a smart building is now putting a lens onto the construction and delivery process of a building that has never been there before.
Totally.
Right? You were talking about the role of an independent commissioning agent. Now, the independent commissioning agent, their sole purpose of being there is to make sure that a BMS actually has been whole mechanical plant is being delivered to a standard that's going to meet specifications, going to meet the standards that are required, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is now being required for technology. So for the first time, a lot of contractors are being scrutinized as to the quality of the work of the systems that they're actually delivering, right? So for the first time, there's someone looking over their shoulder and saying, is your people counting system actually counting all the number of people in the building accurately? Yeah. Has it been commissioned properly? Are we getting data out of these, electric vehicle chargers properly in the right way? Can we actually understand, the faults in there? Or what are the data points associated with the car parking system? Is it working? So there's a lens now that we're applying across multiple systems for an entire building, which we're calling a smart building, in a process that's never been done before. And I think this is somewhat confronting, as you could imagine, for a lot of people, right? That I think a lot of people don't inherently understand the way buildings actually work. In the first place, they just understand, car park thing seems to be working. Yep, access control seems to be working. Seems to be working is the key phrase here. But the data tells the true story. Oh, not all the controllers are actually online. Oh, it's not actually counting accurately something else. Oh, it's not something else. So, in a way, that I think the good thing about the technology and the data layer and so forth there is you're independently validating that each of these different systems that the owner is actually investing in is actually working and working optimally, which then comes back to the definition of a smart building, although building is able to continuously improve its performance over time. So unless you've actually created an environment where you can actually prove that point and understand that here's your line in the sand, and from this point forward, we can actually improve upon that. Yeah, it's a real challenge, right? So the successful project, coming back to the original sort of question, is the project where that team is actually working together with a shared vision that says, look, this is the outcome we actually need. It's not just a tick in the box that says, yes, system X has been implemented. Good, excellent. I'll see you later. Let me know if anything happens within the defects liability period. It's like, no, this all has to work together in a way. So therefore, it has to be understood by the contractors when the moment they're engaged, that this is the outcome we're looking for. And that's where the successful projects actually happen, because everyone was able to understand that is the outcome that's actually going to be required here. And when you go through that process and actually able to ascertain that all these things did actually occur, and you can articulate that in a way that demonstrates to other people that that's the case, then you have a successful project on your hands. But it doesn't end there. Obviously, it all then comes down the line as to how it's going to be operated. And the handover to the operations team is really, really important. And you need those rare gems of people, which is the next generation of professionals that I think we genuinely need in the industry. Is like, how do you understand and get on board with all this use of technology, right? Mm-hmm. That's the industry's crying out for you. If you want to do your digital twin, well, you better find the right guy that understands how to the implications of running a building that actually is a digital twin, because it's complex, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Bruce, this has been awesome. Let's close with some carve-outs. So my carve-out's easy. It's your book, Smarter Buildings, Better Experiences. I'll put that link to the book in the show notes. People definitely check it out. What's yours though?
I mean, I listen to a whole bunch of different sort of podcasts on different things. I listen to a podcast called Fully Charged, which is all around electric vehicles and electrification of transport and so forth, which leads to all sorts of new things around battery sort of technology and so forth. That's on the nerd side of things. Cool. The Business Wars is awesome. So there's a great lot of narratives around there, Coke versus Pepsi and, Uber versus Lyft and things like that, which is pretty, awesome. There's another sort of awesome sort of tech one called Another Podcast, which is these sort of Silicon Valley analysts are talking about all the latest sort of tech and so forth is going on there. So I top myself up with that every now and again. There's one called 99% Invisible, which is pretty awesome. Just a lot of to do with either design and built environment, and it's a nice sort of steady pace talking about things that are going on in the world. On the music front, I like listening to a lot of sort of electronic sort of house progressive.
All right,
sort of stuff like that as well. So I listen to Days Like Night by Elkie Klein. So he does a podcast of all the what his sets that he's done somewhere around the world, cool. Like that as well. So I keep up to date with all sort of the latest music, much to the horror of other people for me, horror of other people who just have not as progressive music tastes as I do.
That's great. I'll have to put those in the show notes too.
Yeah, pretty mixed. I'll send you those links on there as well. But sometimes it's good to be out there on different fronts as well. So not just the straight tech and business stuff as well, but on the music as well. So I enjoy that.
Yeah, love it. Making the podcast more groovy.
There you go. Yeah, give it something else.
All right, Bruce. Well, thanks for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. Thanks, James.
All right, friends. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus podcast. For more episodes like this and to get the weekly Nexus newsletter, which, by the way, readers have said is the best way to stay up to date on the future of the smart buildings industry, please subscribe at nexuslabs.online. You can find the show notes for this conversation there as well. Have a great day.